if you're contemplating writing a piece of music. It's a little scary, but it's also a little exhilarating. And the scariness of it is, well, I guess I'll just hold on to this. You're standing at the edge of this precipice, but it's not a natural precipice of Bryce Canyon. I call it the edge of the creative precipice. All of what humankind has done is behind you. All of the art that has ever been made is behind you. All of the music that's ever been composed is behind you. All of the activities of humankind, good, bad, and indifferent, are behind you. What's in front, in this abyss, or the creative abyss, I call it, is the unknown art that is yet to be made. The music that is yet to be composed by you. The art that is yet to be painted by you. That's what lies ahead. And that's what I'm going to be speaking about this evening. I may have to refer to my notes from time to time. I think there's a little lack of oxygen up here. I'm used to sea level, so it's a little daunting. And this is a beautiful part of the world, for sure. If it wasn't 9 or 10 hours away, I might spend more time out here in southwestern Utah. I had a great-great-grandfather in 1841 who was here, traveled by horseback. It took him a year and a half to get here from St. Louis, Missouri. And he is standing on the edge of the Western world as it's known then in St. Louis, Missouri, not looking down but looking out into the Wild West, which was unknown really at the time. Think perhaps 20, 30 years after the Lewis and Clark expedition. He had read the report of Lewis and Clark, which had been handed to President Jefferson at the time. So good old Rufus Sage is standing at the edge of the world as he knew it, just as you and I stand at the edge of the creative world as we begin a new painting or begin a new piece of music. He traveled by horseback along, I'll try to do this backwards so you're looking at the map, from St. Louis, Missouri, up along the North Fork of the Platte River to Laramie, Wyoming, which was a tiny little army outpost at the time. Spent a winter up in the Dakotas. My great-great-grandfather, another guy, 2 mules and 2 horses. They were sent there to see if it was a place to have a trading outpost. They came back in the spring and they said, no, don't bother going there. So he didn't. He went on then to what is now, I think it's called Steamboat Springs, came across the pass to Salt Lake City. From Salt Lake City went south to Mexico, which is now New Mexico, came back to Salt Lake City, then went further west to the mouth of the Columbia River, rested up a bit, went back to Connecticut, where he was from, another year and a half, 3-year trip. Wrote a book about it called Rocky Mountain Life, which became a bestseller in the 1850s. Historians nowadays use it as a primary reference for studying the West at the time. The point I'm trying to make is that he had the nerve and the interest and, in a way, the audacity to step out from the known world into the unknown world, which is what we do as painters, as composers, and yes, as writers as well. But I'm going to speak about nonverbal arts this evening. And you're at the edge of this creative precipice, I call it. It's a little scary. It can be exhilarating. And the thing is, as you face an empty canvas, you can do whatever you like on the canvas. Now, in the outside world, outside of the art studio, you cannot do anything you like. There's certain restrictions there. The trick is not to confuse the two. In the studio, you may do whatever you like. Outside of the studio, there are conventions of society that are important to observe. Some artists in the past have not observed those, and they feel that they can do whatever they want in the studio and out. We know about all of those. But as you face the canvas, you can do whatever you like, really. Remember, I was in a class with Lucas Foss, who was a composer, a conductor, a wonderful pianist. And he said, it's great, it's a wonderful thing to want to express yourself, he said. But you have to have a project. And the project we are speaking of, the project of art, the project of music, is this open canvas, this abyss, the edge of the creative precipice, I call it. And what do? Well, you can do whatever you want, really, to begin with. There are several writers, several painters, several authors have written about this particular topic very well. I'll just mention two authors that I suggest you read if you have not read yet, and I'm guessing they are in the library here. The first is a small pamphlet about this thick, written by Igor Stravinsky, who gave in the late 1940s a lecture at Harvard, one of the Norton lectures. And it was published as The Poetics of Music. It's a very tiny little book. And in it, he describes this compositional music, this process of composing music. And it's beautifully written, and it's something, I'm not ashamed to give my age to say I now read every decade, so I've been around a while. If you haven't read it yet, though, I suggest you do. And another book written by an artist, a man named Robert Henry, not Robert Henri, but Robert Henry, taught at the Art Students League in New York City for a number of years. He wrote a wonderful book entitled Art as Spirit. I think that's the title. Or maybe just Art Spirit. Art Spirit, yeah. It's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, do. If you're an artist, I suggest you start with the Stravinsky Poetics of Music. Then proceed to the Robert Henry. If you're a musician, I suggest you start with the Robert Henry and proceed to the Stravinsky, because you will learn from both of them, and you will see gradually that the things we face, the creative issues we face, are very similar. So as we face an empty canvas, the question is, now what? What do we do now? It's important to remember that the art you love is not necessarily the art that you need to make for yourself. Let me say that again. The art that you love, the art that knocks you out, that probably propelled you to become an artist, to bring you to this place, is not necessarily the art for you to make. Just as in the world of music. The music that you love, the music that propelled you to become a music student, to become a musician, is not necessarily the music you need to write for yourself. Because, let's say you love the paintings of Velázquez, let's say. But there's no point really in painting like Velázquez because you're not Velázquez. So the art you like and the art you love is not necessarily the art you need to write. Another thing that I want to point out is it's important not to confuse the acquisition of skill with creative work. Let me explain. When I was studying music as an undergraduate, I was taking a class in 18th century counterpoint, which is to say, writing music in the manner of and the style of Johann Sebastian Bach. And I was having a tough time, and I was a pretty smart kid. I was a pretty good musician. I had studied Walter Piston's harmony as an undergraduate, gone through all of those exercises successfully, and written some small pieces in various styles. I was having a tough time. And the instructor called me into the class, and he said, Preston, he said, have a seat. And he was a mentor of mine, so I knew he wasn't going to whack me over the head metaphorically. He said, you're having trouble here. I said, yes, I know. He said, you don't have to do it better than Bach. I was trying to outdo the person I was studying. And all of a sudden, the whole sky opened up. And I realized, yes, I was trying to do it better than Bach. I thought I had to do it better than one of the greats of all time. He said, no, that's not, you don't have to do that. All you need to do is to understand what he did somehow by studying what he's done and trying to do what he's done in a small sort of way, in your own way. You don't have to be better than him. You can't, because you're not him. So it's important not to confuse the acquisition of skill with a creative work endeavor, creative work itself. I mentioned Velázquez. He did a lot of academic drawing as a way of finding out what the greats from the past did. He didn't call it his own creative work. It was study to develop certain skills. Right? Johann Sebastian Bach copied the scores of Vivaldi to learn about Vivaldi. He didn't copy the scores to write like Vivaldi. He didn't have any interest in that. He copied the scores just to acquire technique. So it's important to distinguish those two things. And another thing that's important, as you begin, as you look at that canvas, that open abyss, that big canyon below you, and you wonder what to do next, Remember, all the skills that you need, the only skills, the only technique you need is what you need to finish that piece. You don't need to know all of these skills of art forever to do the piece you're doing. If you're doing a watercolor, you don't need to know how to do silver point etching to do the watercolor. If you're doing oil paint, or work in oil painting, it's not necessarily for that work to know about watercolor. The techniques that you need to develop are the techniques you need to finish the work you are now undertaking. Period. Otherwise, you'd never do anything. You'd be busy acquiring the skills. You acquire the skills as you make the work. That's another thing that's important, I think, to know as an artist. And the only way to find out what your particular wheat is, I mentioned earlier the wheat of your creative self, is to look at that canvas, is to start, work on, and complete a piece of art, or complete a piece of music, excuse me, if you're a composer. And remember, you want to get to the best that you have. So you're in your studio, you're facing that empty piece of canvas, you say, how do I start? What do I do now? That is the age-old question. What is art anyway? What is music anyway? Music is the organization of sounds in time. End of definition. Organization of sound over time. What is art? The organization of shapes, colors, pigments, materials in space. Materials organized in space, sounds organized in time. So the answer to what do I do now is in how you work with the materials themselves, the materials you're working. So here you are. You've done nothing yet. You can do anything in the world. You can do, well, like I said, you can put on that canvas anything you feel like. So how do you begin? Well, I suggest you begin with something that knocks you out once you see it. That you put a mark on the canvas or on the paper and you, look at that, that's phenomenal. And you want to go say to your girlfriend or boyfriend or your wife or your husband or your lover or your instructor, look at this is fantastic. Aha, you say to yourself. That's when you start. You commit to the aha. You've all had that experience. I hope if you haven't, you will. If you work hard enough at what you're doing. The aha of the moment. Without that, it's an exercise. It's a mechanical thing. You're a technician. You're a manipulator of materials. But art is a lot more than just the materials that are used. It's that aha that propels you to finish, to complete, to work on and complete the piece. Because it's hard work doing a piece of art. So you may as well get a kick out of it. So you get a kick out of it by saying, by working with the material, oh, that's fantastic, I'm going to use that. Start right off the bat. Commit to it, and then proceed. Just some examples of what I'm speaking of. I want to illustrate this. Now, Andy and I practiced our AV skills earlier, and I hope it all works. I'm going to start with, as the first example, a piece of music. It is the Symphony No. 5 of Beethoven. Most of you will recognize at least the opening motive if you're not familiar with the music itself. And there's no question that Beethoven is one of the greats of all time. But the question is, why is he great? Because we all have, each of us, a visceral reaction to the music, a gut response to what's going on in the music. We don't know what that is, but we have a gut response to it. And that's what makes the music of Beethoven great, is that gut response, that indescribable reaction that you have when you hear the music. Like I said, it's not the talking about it. People have tried to describe what goes on in the Beethoven Symphony in an emotional way, but they fail. So, before I go on, I want you to beware of art speak. Beware of the lingo of art. For example, I'll give you one example. We all know what the word modern means, right?